because your royalties are going to be quite good. If you don't write songs and you perform on a record that's released, you'll be entitled to a mechanical copyright royalty, and that means you're not a songwriter, but you're just a performer on the record. You're in the band, as an example. If the bands form and they do an album, a record deal. Has anybody got any idea how much out of an average record deal percentage that you would, as a band, get from a record deal? Anybody got any thoughts on that?
60%.
60%, you think? Okay. Anybody else got any thoughts on that? Well, a reasonably good record deal for a band is about 15%. Yeah, it's not very good, is it? Especially if you are selling, I don't know, well, it depends what you can sell. I mean, MP3 is not doing very well, are they? But let's assume in the good old days when you could sell a CD for a tenner, then it would mean that you get £1.50 for the band. So you've got to sell a lot, a hell of a lot. So how does this affect you as a session musician? Well, what normally happens is that you'll go along and you'll get a royalty payment which is inclusive of part of the sales of a recording, and the money is generated from the PRS, who collect it from like the BBC, Sky, film, TV, the media basically. And what happens is they collect all this revenue for you, and then they pay you in quarterly statements. So that means you've got to go, yeah, I can see the look on his face. 3 months without any money? Yeah, 3 months without any money. If you do a recording today, guys, right this minute now, you're not going to see a royalty payment for up to 18 months. It takes that long to go out of your guitar, all the way through the system, and all the way back into your bank account. It's a long time, isn't it? 18 months to do a session, and then you get paid. Now, when it comes to being a session musician, somebody mentioned a producer. What happens with record labels in particular is quite often you'll find that record labels, especially with the X Factor and stuff these days, they have lots of singers which they need to make recordings for. At this point, a lot of software is used, of course, but quite often they call on the demands of session musicians to make the recordings happen. Session musicians are appointed by producers largely who work for record labels. So a record label would appoint somebody, and then the producer would come in and say, I'm going to get Callum to play on this guitar track because he's going to do a really good job of it. Now, Callum's worried about getting paid in 18 months' time. I can see a look on his face. How long have I got to pay? But there are, of course, fees that musicians get, session musicians get, as a standard fee for a session. Now, the interesting question is, how much do you think you're worth for a session? Has anybody got any idea? Declan, drums, tomorrow, 3-hour session, how much do you charge? A tenner. Guy at the back with the Vans t-shirt, what do you play? Drums. Okay. 3-hour session tomorrow in London. What's your fee?
I have no idea.
It's all right to have no idea. It is, honestly, it really is. Any female singers at the front here? I think we've got one open. How much do you charge for a vocal session for 2 hours? No, that's okay. It's a difficult one, isn't it? Because, you know, you all have got a set of skills, and there's a price for your set of skills to be used in the studio. And the question that everybody's kind of asking is like, you know, how much do I mean, it's the same for me when I do sessions on it. How much do I charge them for this? Do I go in too high and get knocked down, or do they just use somebody else? It's a difficult one, isn't it? If you were probably going out on your first recording session, the Musicians Union kind of recommend rates, but they're usually for classical musicians quite a lot of the time. So people in that area of the music industry tend to try and negotiate a fee. Now, looking around the room, it would appear that most of you, and rightly so, don't really know how much you're going to charge for a session. I've probably got an idea. But then again, there's people I know that charge 10 times more than me, and it depends who you're playing for, doesn't it? I mean, if someone says, you know, you're going to play on the new Billie Eilish record, then you might sort of pump the price up a little bit. But if you're going to play for Sky Sports on a, I don't know, boxing advert, I mean, how much do you charge for that? I mean, what is the fee for that? 3 quid. You're hired for 3 quid. Definitely. What's your expenses like as a musician? It's going to cost you some money to get to London or somewhere, isn't it? So you can add, even if you took your guitar on the train, you've got to eat as well, so it's going to be 50 quid before you've done anything, isn't it, really? And then there's your time. How much do you value your time, and how much is your time worth at the end of the day? Let's assume that you are good enough to do this session. Let's say you are. How much are you worth? That's the question, isn't it? How much do you say when they say to you, how much do you want for the session? Still a lot of uncertainty in the room. Still more. Okay. So, my mate played saxophone for George Michael. And I always wanted to know how much he got paid for a gig when he was playing for George Michael. And it was difficult, because it's very difficult to ask somebody, isn't it? What would you get paid for playing with George? You know, he's like, doesn't sound right, does it? But what is the fee, you know? And so I had a coffee with him one day, and I said, you know, when you were on tour with George, I mean, you know, if you do a gig, he's going, yeah. I said, how do you know what to charge? I mean, what do you get paid? I mean, without being really personal. And he said, yeah. He said, well, that's a good question, isn't it? He said, what happened with George, he said, is that we used to be on what's called a retainer. He said, well, he would pay us £25,000 a year to stay at home. That's all right, isn't it? I said, I could do that job. I do that job most days. I said, so you're staying at home for £25,000? He said, yeah. He said, but if George phones me up at 2:30 a.m. and says, I want a bit of saxophone on a record, I've got to get in my car from Lincoln and drive to Reading. All right, so that's quite, okay, but you're getting that anyway. He said, yeah. So in the industry, we call that a retainer. And a lot of famous artists, I've got a friend of mine who's a drummer in Jamiroquai, and he's on a retainer too. And so are the rest of the band. And this retainer thing is kind of what's used by a lot of big bands or big artists in terms of them just being able to keep musicians available, okay, so that they're at any time. And then, when they go on tour, they get extra payments. And those extra payments are sometimes called per diems. Funny word. When someone said that to me, they said, what's your per diems? I was like, what? Am I wearing them, or what are they? They said, you know, your per diems. And I was embarrassed, I didn't know what they meant by it. And apparently I found out very quickly that you charge a daily rate for your McDonald's, you know, your wherever you eat, drinks, coffees, that sort of thing. And so they tend to ask you, you know, or they offer you a daily rate for your per diems when you go on tour. So this is kind of an extra payment, if you like. I mean, it's normally about 25, 30 pounds a day. If you're abroad, it's a little bit more. And then, of course, some of the questions people ask you is when they're going on tour and they're working as session musicians, does the accommodation come supplied? And yes, it does. But a lot of people seem to ask that question. What about if you get your instrument stolen or you lose it? That's your fault. That's not covered. Anyway, Andy was telling me he'd got a basic amount to be George Michael's saxophone player, and that every time he played a gig, if it was outside of the UK, he was getting £800 for a gig. And of course, when they go on tour, they do 27, 28 dates. But then, of course, the tours would last for 2 months or a month or so. But then George would go off and do something else, and they'd be back at home. Now, in that in-between time, Derek, the drummer from Jamiroquai, was telling me that when he doesn't play with JK, what he does is he's in another band. But of course, when JK phones up, everything has to drop, and he has to go and join him. But he's on the same arrangement. It's kind of what's called a retainer in the industry, where literally you stay at home and get paid for it, but you obviously have to be available at any time the artist needs you to go out and do that. Question?
So the most like top session musicians then, do they only they'll only be on a retainer for like one artist? So surely like pay is like limited then?
Yeah, no, the guys way above the level that I perform at, they work for 2 or 3, and what they do is they negotiate. They'll say, you know, well, obviously can't go out with George Michael anymore, but they'll say I'm doing I'm doing something for Madonna next month, and they'll keep that clear, and they'll go from contract to contract. It's a good question, yeah. And some of them, if they're really in demand, will insist on a contract that gives them the freedom, or they'll say that I'm only available for you for 3 months. But you know, but these people are really at the top end of the business, and they can command that sort of level of fee, don't you?
How do you find those contracts?
How do you
Find the contracts?
The contracts are really. I've not had one like that, if I'm honest. But the guys that I know that do have those contracts. What tends to happen is, it's a really funny game, the session thing. You've got to be a good player, without a questionable doubt. But it all seems to work on somebody who knows somebody. And for example, I think Oasis's previous guitar player who joined them when they left, he was a sound engineer. So could play the guitar quite well. When it might have been a bass player or whatever, but when they had the fallout in the studio, they didn't think, right, well, we need to go and audition a load of really good bass players for Oasis. They just looked around and said, Dave, you play bass, don't you? He's like, oh, yeah, I'm doing a sound engineer. Yeah, I do, yeah. Do you want to join Oasis? Oh, yeah, all right then. Cheers, guys. There is no formula for the music industry. It is literally, a lot of it works on who you know. All of it really works on who you know. And it seems to me that all the people that I know that are doing pretty good have all got a phone full of connections that I haven't got. And I speak to my mate Johnny, and he's like, yeah, I'm off in Rome next month. I'm thinking, oh right, I'm not. He's saying, yeah. I said, okay, well you doing? Oh, I'm out with Jeff Beck, and it's like, oh right, okay. You know, and you sort of think, you know, how did they get that? And let's face it, some of these musicians that I play with, they're really, really good. But they're probably not as good as your teachers, but they just happen to be able to know other people. And it seems to be that the whole of the session world kind of works on that kind of format. Now, one of the other interesting things about performing as a session musician is it's changed a little bit. Quite a number of years ago, I used to get a call and they'd phone me up and they'd say, "Want you to do a Barclays Bank advert, music for it, in Surrey on Thursday." And I'd be like, "Right." So I'd load up the car, put a load of gear in, drive all the way down to the studio, unload the car, set the gear up, play the session, meet the producer as it were, get instructed as to what I'm going to play, hopefully play it correctly and then go home. And then hopefully 3 or 4 weeks later, or sometimes on the day, get paid for it. And then what happened is, probably about 7 or 8 years ago, I got a phone call and someone said, "Yeah, we don't use a studio anymore, but we still need you to do some guitar for the Irish Tourist Board." "Okay, but you haven't got a studio anymore." "Yeah, we kind of thought you would deal with that." I'm like, "What, me? I'm just a guitarist. I can't record and all that shit, you know." It's like, well, I mean, you know, I just turn up and put my gear up and, "Yeah, well, we haven't got the studio anymore. Do you want to do the job?" "Yeah, I do want to do the job. So what you're saying, I've got to record, oh, you're going to send me the backtrack, oh, I see, right, yeah." So, there I was, just playing guitar, and I had to become a producer. They had to learn about Pro Tools and Cubase and all that stuff. They had to learn about mixing. I mean, I was on the other side of the microphone, guys, like you lot, and before you know it, there's like, these songs are coming through, and I've got to put guitar in. And normally, the producers would be saying, "Don't play that, play it like this." But there's nobody there, so have I got it right? Am I playing the bit that they want?